girl and her father vanished somewhere between Austin and the open Texas highways, leaving Margaret Halbrook with a hollow ache that would shadow her for the next 16 years. On this particular autumn afternoon, sunlight slanted through the windows of her Austin living room, stretching long shadows over the worn hardwood. Margaret sat stiffly on a floral sofa, gripping the television remote like it was a lifeline, while her mother, Doris, perched beside her, their annual ritual playing out with a mix of hope and dread. "It's almost time," Margaret whispered, turning up the volume as the local news faded in. Every year, on this day, she paid to have her family's missing persons alert aired. An act of devotion and desperation rolled into one. The screen flashed an old photo. Jim Halbrook, his dark mustache framing a warm smile, stood proudly beside 80-year-old Lucia, her eyes alight with the promise of a life she'd never get to live. Beside them gleamed the pride of Jim's Garager 1979 red Cadillac DeVille. The anchor's voice carried the familiar plea: anyone with information should call the Austin Police Department. Margaret clicked the TV off, the silence pressing in like a storm cloud. Doris rose slowly, squeezing her daughter's hand before heading upstairs, and Margaret found herself drifting toward the bookshelf. She pulled down a worn leather photo album, opening it like a sacred text. Jim beside the Cadillac, Lucia's first day of school, family smiles at Barton Springs. Her trembling finger traced her daughter's cheek in the photograph. "Where are you?" she murmured, just as the phone's sharp ring sliced through the stillness. "Mrs. Halbrook," came Officer Daniels's voice. "We've received a report of possible evidence found at a junkyard in San Marcos. It may be connected to your husband and daughter's case." Margaret gripped the counter for balance. He wouldn't explain further over the phone, but offered to send a patrol car within 10 minutes. Heart pounding, she called upstairs to Doris, who returned, pale-faced but resolute. "I'm coming with you," her mother said. They waited in taut silence until a cruiser pulled up, Officer Martinez at the wheel. The hour-long drive south passed in a blur of mesquite trees and barbed wire fences, Margaret's mind spiraling with what-ifs, while Doris sat rigid, clutching her purse like a shield. When they finally pulled into Harrow's Auto Salvage, Margaret's stomach clenched at the sight. Yellow police tape fluttering in the breeze, uniformed officers moving with deliberate care around a section of rusting cars, and the sense that after 16 years, the past was about to demand answers. Officer Martinez guided Margaret and Doris through a twisting labyrinth of rusting fenders and shattered windshields until they reached a tight knot of officers and investigators. "Detective Reyes," Martinez called, and a tall man in plain clothes turned toward them, his face a careful mask of professionalism. "Mrs. Halbrook, Mrs. Barrett, thank you for coming so quickly," he said. Margaret's voice was steady, though her hands betrayed her, as she asked, "What did you find?" Reyes stepped aside, and the air seemed to thin around her. There, mangled and half-crushed beneath the towering shadow of a nearby excavator, was a red Cadillac DeVille, the same car Jim had cherished, saved for, polished every Sunday morning. The once bright paint was dulled by years of exposure, patches of rust creeping along its curves. But Margaret knew. Doris gripped her arm, with a trembling whisper, "Oh my God," as Margaret stepped forward, moving as though in a dream. Officers documented every angle, measuring, photographing, combing the surrounding dirt for clues. Reyes explained gently that the interior was too damaged to inspect, but asked for confirmation. Circling the car, Margaret's gaze locked on a small dent in the chrome wheel cover a curb Jim had clipped the week before they vanished, a repair they never got to make. Her voice was soft but certain. "Yes, this is their car." Reyes gave a solemn nod, motioning over a man lingering at the scene. Dean Lamb, the junkyard's owner, stepped forward, wiping his hands on a rag, his apology tumbling out before his handshake could be accepted. He swore he had no idea about the car's history, claiming it had been scheduled for crushing that very morning. He'd recognized it only after seeing the missing persons alert on television and immediately called the police. But when Margaret demanded to know who brought it in, his answer only deepened the mystery. It wasn't in his system at all. Doris bristled, calling it suspicious, but Reyes reminded her that Dean's tip had led them here. Dean insisted his yard had strict intake rules, IDs, paperwork, everything logged. Then a woman in greasy overalls strode up, breaking the tension. "I saw Reed bring it in," she said, drawing every eye. Reyes asked for clarification, and Dean explained Reed Caraway was his business partner and head technician. The detective wasted no time, ordering Reed to be located immediately. Dean tried calling but got no answer, finally producing an address in South Austin for the officers to follow up on. Reyes also inquired about Reed's office on site, which Dean confirmed was locked and would require a warrant to search. While commands were issued and officers moved to secure both the address and the office, Margaret stood frozen, her eyes on the wreckage. 16 years of sleepless nights, desperate leads, and fading hope had all led here to this broken machine that had once carried away her husband and little girl. Yet there were no remains, no personal effects, just the haunting presence of the Cadillac, waiting to give up its secrets. Reyes turned back to them. "We're going to search the grounds. Mrs. Halbrook, Mrs. Barrett, if you can, your help in identifying anything we find could be crucial." Margaret gave a silent nod and fell into step beside Doris as the officers began combing through the junkyard, sifting through twisted metal heaps and stacks of discarded parts under the relentless Texas sun. Hours dragged by with no sign of Jim or Lucia, only the clatter of shifting scrap and the low murmur of investigators comparing notes. By the time they found themselves outside Reed Caraway's locked office, fatigue had settled into Margaret's bones, her shoulders slumped against the wall. Doris stood close, one arm protectively draped around her daughter, both women lost in heavy thought. When the sun reached its zenith, the distant growl of engines broke the stillness. 2 police cruisers rolled in, followed closely by a dark blue pickup that stopped a short distance away. A man in his mid-20s climbed out, short brown hair neatly trimmed, work clothes bearing the junkyard's logo across the breast pocket. Detective Reyes moved toward him with purpose. "Mr. Caraway." The young man nodded, confusion creasing his brow. "Yes, what's going on?" "I was told you needed me here." Reyes introduced himself and gestured toward Margaret and Doris, explaining the car's significance, a red Cadillac tied to a 16-year-old disappearance. Reed's expression shifted to sober sympathy as he offered his hand to Margaret, which she accepted after a pause. But Reyes pressed on, his voice firm. The Cadillac hadn't been logged into the yard's system, and a co-worker had seen Reed bring it in. Reed exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "About a week ago," he explained, "an older man had driven it in while Dean was away, saying he wanted it destroyed. He'd paid cash generously and bolted when Reed asked for paperwork, leaving the keys in the ignition." Reyes leaned forward. "Did he give you a name?" Reed shook his head. "No, he just walked off." When asked for a description, Reed hesitated, then spoke. "Tall, around 6 feet, lean build, grey hair that might once have been dark, a thick mustache, glasses, khakis, button-up shirt, soft-spoken." Margaret's breath caught, her face blanching. That sounds like Jim," she whispered to Doris, who blurted out in disbelief. "That's impossible." Reyes turned sharply. "Mrs. Halbrook, are you saying this could be your husband?" Margaret nodded, her hands trembling. "The height, the build, the mustache. And Jim always wore button-ups, even on weekends." Reed guessed the man was in his 50s, but looked weathered. Doris shook her head. "It doesn't make sense. Jim loved that car. He worked for years to buy it." Margaret's voice rose with urgency. "And why now, after 16 years? Where is Lucia?" Reyes lifted a calming hand. "We need facts before conclusions." He then asked to search Reed's locked office. Reed agreed without hesitation, explaining that valuable tools and catalogs were kept inside. As they walked toward the squat, sun-bleached building, Margaret and Doris exchanged a look, one of hope tangled with dread. Doris finally whispered, "Do you really think it could have been Jim?" "It sounds like him, but why would Jim abandon the car after all these years? And if it was him, where's Lucia?" Her voice cracked. "I can't believe he'd do that." "Maybe it's someone trying to throw us off," Doris murmured, her tone cautious. They reached the narrow hallway of the office building, Reed stopping at the final door and unlocking it before stepping aside for Detective Reyes. "Please wait here," Reyes instructed, disappearing inside with his team. But before Margaret could settle into the uneasy stillness, Doris's hand flew to her chest, her breath catching in sharp, ragged bursts. "Mom, what's wrong?" Margaret's alarm cut through the hum of police activity. "My asthma," Doris gasped, rummaging frantically through her purse. "I think the stressed my inhaler." Margaret guided her to a bench, finding the inhaler buried at the bottom of the bag, and holding it steady as Doris took several deep pulls. Slowly, her breathing eased, though her face stayed pale. "I'm okay now," she insisted, brushing off Detective Reyes's offer of an ambulance. "Just need a minute." The search inside Reed's office continued, officers occasionally emerging with an item for Margaret to inspect. Each one met with a quiet shake of her head. After nearly an hour, Reyes reappeared, his expression a measured blend of apology and determination. "Nothing directly linked to your husband or daughter," he admitted. Margaret's shoulders sagged, but Reyes leaned forward slightly. "Finding the Cadillac is progress. Now we focus on who brought it here and why." Turning to Reed, he requested a formal statement at the station. Reed agreed, offering to drive his own truck back to Austin. Margaret and Doris would ride, with the detectives, Doris leaning into her daughter's arm for support. "You sure you're up for this?" Margaret asked quietly. Doris's grip tightened. "I wouldn't miss it. If there's even a chance of learning what happened to Jim and Lucia, I'll be there." As they left, the afternoon sun blazed over the junkyard, its light glinting off the crushed red Cadillac like a cruel reminder. At the Austin Police Department, the atmosphere shifted to the sterile brightness of a small conference room. Margaret and Doris sat opposite Detective Reyes and another officer, while Reed was interviewed separately. Reyes opened a thick case file, his voice steady. "Let's walk through the timeline again. Sometimes, fresh eyes reveal what's been hiding in plain sight." Margaret clasped her hands on the table. Jim and Lucia left early on Saturday morning, October 12, 1984. Jim ran his dental practice here in Austin. He built it from nothing, earned the respect of everyone who knew him. He had his own style, colorful ties, a thick mustache, that easy charm his patients loved. A wistful smile flickered as she added, "Lucia was 8, bright, full of life. She adored her father. She went wherever he went when she wasn't in school." "You didn't go on the trip with them?" the second officer asked, pen scratching across his notepad. Margaret shook her head at the officer's question. "Mom needed help that weekend. She was moving furniture around after Dad passed. It was supposed to be just one night, a quick trip to Llano. Jim wanted to show Lucia the hill country's fall colors, maybe take her to Enchanted Rock. They were supposed to be home Sunday evening." Her voice dimmed as she recalled the moment her certainty began to unravel. "Sunday night, Jim had promised to call when they left Llano. When I didn't hear from him by dinner, I called the motel. They told me he and Lucia had checked out. That morning, I called friends, family. No one had seen or heard from them. By Monday morning, I went to the police." Doris gave her daughter's hand a quiet squeeze. "We've been looking ever since." Detective Reyes nodded, his tone grave as he reviewed the original investigation. Officers had checked gas stations, stores, and diners along the route, questioned motel staff, scoured what limited surveillance existed in 1984. Jim's credit cards were never used again. His bank accounts sat untouched. The dental practice he'd built from nothing remained frozen in time. "The technology just wasn't what it is now," the second officer said. "No cell phones, fewer cameras. We did everything we could." Margaret's voice tightened. "And now, 16 years later, his car turns up in a junkyard, there by someone who looks like him." A silence settled over the table. Reyes leaned forward, closing the file. "Mrs. Halbrook, is it possible your husband left voluntarily?" Margaret stiffened. "Absolutely not. We had a good marriage. He adored Lucia. His practice was thriving. He had no reason to leave." Reyes's tone softened. "Sometimes people hide things, even from those closest to them." "Not Jim," Margaret shot back. "And even if, by some impossible chance, he had a secret, he would never take Lucia away from me. Never." A knock at the door broke the tension. A female officer stepped in to report that Reed Carraway's statement was complete. Reyes thanked her, then turned back to Margaret and Doris. "We'll follow this lead. The car will be examined, and we'll try to track its movements over the last 16 years. For now, you should go home and rest. It's been a long day." Margaret was startled to see it was past 2 o'clock. They moved toward the lobby, where Reed sat scrolling through his phone. He stood at their approach. "All done?" he asked. "Yes," Margaret replied. "Thank you for cooperating." Reyes nodded. "We'll be in touch if we need more." Reed glanced between the women. "I could give you a ride. I live in Hyde Park." Reyes started to refuse, but an urgent message from another officer pulled him aside. Margaret weighed the choice. Her mother was exhausted, and waiting for a police escort or taxi could take far longer. Reed had been cooperative, and the police knew where to find him. We'd appreciate the ride, she decided, telling Reyes, who returned looking reluctant but agreed. I have his plate and info, he said. Call immediately if anything feels wrong. Reed's pickup, though aged, was clearly cared forly and well maintained, and with the faint smell of motor oil and dust that clung to everything in the Texas sun. Margaret gave her mother a puzzled look, but Doris's expression left no room for argument. Sharp intent, and just a little afraid. The sound of a drawer sliding shut came from inside the office, followed by the rustle of papers. Reed's voice floated through the half-open door, low and indistinct, as if he were talking to himself. The air in the hallway felt heavy, the faint smell of oil and rust pressing in. Somewhere outside, a metal beam crashed against concrete, making Margaret flinch. The doorknob rattled. Just trust me, Doris murmured, her fingers tightening on Margaret's sleeve. Look at that top shelf when the door swings open. Margaret's pulse picked up. She turned her head just enough to see the cabinet in question, dusty display case cluttered with old binders, coffee mugs, and grease-stained manuals. Whatever Doris thought she'd seen, it had rattled her. The hinges squealed as Reed opened the door. Light spilled into the hallway, glinting off the cabinet's glass. Margaret's eyes went to the top shelf. The passenger door for Doris, helping her climb into the cab. Margaret slides into the middle seat. Reed, where in Hyde Park are you? Margaret, Speedway near 45th. Reed, I'm on Avenue H practically. Neighbors, funny we've never crossed paths before. Margaret, thank you again for the ride. The pickup pulls out. The streets of Austin drift by in a slow summer haze. Reed keeps the conversation casual, talking neighborhoods, changes to the city, and gasps, rifling through her purse and pockets. Margaret, what's wrong? Mom. Doris, my inhaler. I think I left it at the junkyard office when I had that attack earlier. Margaret, are you okay? Doris, I'm fine now, but I need that one. It's prescription, and I just got it last week. Reed, I've got asthma too, if you need one. I've got a spare at my place. Margaret, that's kind, but maybe we could just stop at a pharmacy. Doris, I don't want to buy another when mine's probably sitting there. We could just go back and get it. Margaret, now. That's an hour away. Reed, I don't mind driving. Margaret, we can take a taxi. Doris, too expensive. Mr. Carraway is offering. Reed, please. And seriously, no trouble. The junkyard's practically my second home. Margaret sees the stubborn look on her mother's face. Margaret, if you're sure. Mom. Doris, I am. Reed signals and turns around. Ext. Autos, salvage, junkyard. 3:05 p.m. The police are gone, but the crushed Cadillac still sits behind yellow tape. Reed parks, and the three head to the main office where Dean Lamb looks up from the counter. Dean, Reed, Mrs. Hill thought you'd left with the police hours ago. Reed, we did, but Mrs. Barrett thinks she left her inhaler here. Dean, I found it after you all left. Put it in Reed's office for safekeeping. Doris thanks him. Reed fishes out his keys. Int. Junkyard, office hallway moments. Later. Margaret sinks into a worn chair. Doris paces outside the door as Reed disappears inside. Margaret, you okay, Mom? Doris, just overwhelmed. A silence. The distant clang of metal. Margaret, what's taking him so long? Doris glances toward the half-open door, eyes narrowing. Doris, Margaret, when he comes out, look at the top shelf of the glass cabinet across from the door. Margaret, what? Why? Doris, I caught a glimpse. I think I saw a blue handbag up there. Looks like Lucia's. Margaret's heart skips. Margaret, that's impossible. Lucia had it when she disappeared. Doris, just look. Same exact shade. Footsteps. The door swings open. Through the gap there it is. A small blue handbag between dusty technical manuals. Reed, found it on my desk. He hands Doris the inhaler. Margaret can't look away from the cabinet. Margaret read, that blue bag in your office. He follows her gaze, posture tightening just a fraction. Reed, oh, that old thing. Margaret, it looks exactly like my daughter's. Reed, quite a coincidence. Margaret, may I take a closer look? A beat. He shrugs. Reed, sure. Nothing special, belonged to my daughter. Dean looks over. Surprised. Dean, didn't know you had a daughter. Reed, she's with her mother in Houston. Int. Reed's office. Contos. Reed unlocks. The door retrieves the bag. Reed got it for her birthday. She never really used it. Margaret's hands tremble. Same size, same white trim, same clasp she'd bought for Lucia in '84. Margaret, what year did she get this? Reed, oh, few years back. Doris, surprising they still make this style. Reed, fashion, cycles back around. Margaret opens the empty bag. The lining is pristine. Reed, you can keep it if you want. Margaret blinks. Margaret, you'd give away your daughter's birthday present. Reed, she's not missing it. Doris examines the lining, finds a white ribbon tag with faded, erased print. Doris, no manufacturer's mark. Odd for a store-bought gift. Margaret, strange. Reed's tone hardens. Reed, it was a gift from a friend. Margaret fingers the fabric again, feeling the old, familiar weight of it. Margaret turned to her mother, startled by the urgency in her voice. Doris's eyes were sharp, scanning the room as if she'd just seen a ghost. I caught a glimpse when you went in, she said quickly. I swear I saw a blue handbag wedged between some books. Lucia's handbag. Margaret's heart skipped a beat. That's impossible, Mom. She had it with her when she disappeared. Doris's grip tightened. Just look. Same exact shade of blue. Footsteps echoed toward them, and Reed appeared in the doorway, inhaler in hand. Found it. On my desk, he said casually, handing it to Doris. But Margaret's gaze had already locked on the top shelf of the glass cabinet inside. There, it was, a small rectangular handbag with white trim, the precise blue that had once been her daughter's favorite. That blue bag in your office, she said evenly. Reed followed her gaze, his posture stiffening for the briefest moment. Oh, that old thing. My daughter's. You can take a look if you want. Margaret rose without hesitation, and Doris trailed close behind as Reed unlocked the office. He retrieved the handbag and offered it to her. She never liked it. Birthday gift from a school friend. Just kept it here. Margaret turned it over in her trembling hands, recognizing every detail from the one she'd bought Lucia in 1984. What year did she get this? She asked. Reed shrugged. Few years back. Doris's eyes narrowed. Funny, that style hasn't been made since the early '80s. Reed waved it off. Vintage comes back around. The bag was empty, pristine. Yet a small white ribbon tag inside caught Doris's attention, its brand and date deliberately rubbed away. What kind of present has no tag? Margaret pressed. Wouldn't know, Reed replied, a flicker of impatience in his voice. The texture beneath Margaret's fingers was unmistakably it was Lucia's. We'll keep it, Doris said firmly. It's just gathering dust, Reed replied, ushering them toward the truck. Outside, as he stepped away to speak with Dean, Doris whispered, that's her bag. The tag's been tampered with. Margaret's thoughts spun. First, Jim's Cadillac turns up in Reed's yard. Now this coincidence seemed harder to believe. Reed returned with a smile, as if nothing had happened, and soon they were headed north, on Interstate 30. As Margaret sat with the handbag in her lap, tracing its edges, 16 years of wondering, she murmured when Reed remarked on the shock of finding Jim's car. He asked about Jim and Lucia, his tone easy, almost friendly. Margaret hesitated, but spoke. Jim was a dentist grade with kids, always telling jokes, wearing ties with little teeth on them. Reed chuckled. Sounds like a character. Margaret smiled faintly. Lucia was 8, bright, curious, always fashionable. She saved for weeks to buy that bag. Limited edition Barbie collection. Carried it everywhere. She reached into her purse and drew out a faded photograph. Jim with his arm around a beaming Lucia, both standing proudly before the gleaming red Cadillac. This was taken a month before they vanished, she said, handing it to Reed, her eyes never leaving his face. Wait, the same tiny squeak of the zipper that she remembered from all those years ago. Lucia's bag, the one her daughter had paraded proudly through school hallways and grocery store aisles, even insisting it join them on that last trip with Jim. Doris's sudden declaration, "We'll keep it," came with a firmness that left no room for debate. Her arms wrapped around the bag as if it might vanish if she loosened her grip. Reed, unfazed, waved toward the door, reminding them the bag was just gathering dust and nudging them toward his truck. The walk back through the junkyard was silent, save for the crunch of gravel underfoot, and when Reed stepped away to speak to Dean, Doris leaned in close, her whisper tight with urgency. It's Lucia's, I'm sure of it. The tag's been tampered with. Margaret's mind spun. First Jim's car showing up here. Now this bag. How could it all be coincidence? She wanted to believe in chance, but Doris's eyes, sharp as flint, made denial feel foolish. When Reed returned, his cheerfulness felt almost rehearsed, his voice too light for the gravity Margaret carried in her lap. She traced the bag's edges as the truck joined the northbound lanes of Interstate 35, the afternoon light stretching shadows across the dash. Doris sat in the back with her inhaler safely stored away, the silence between them thick and unbroken until Margaret forced conversation. Reed asked about Jim and Lucia with casual interest, but the moment Margaret spoke of her daughter's love for that blue bag, he pressed, "That's why she loved it so much," as if fishing for confirmation. She shared a photograph from just a month before they disappeared, Jim with his moustache and warm grin, Lucia beaming in pink. Reed's eyes flicked to it for barely a second before he described her missing front teeth and the rainbow on her shirt dials. Margaret had not mentioned. The air in the truck shifted instantly, cold and tight. Doris went still. Margaret tucked the photo away with trembling hands, her mind screaming questions she dared not voice. The rest of the ride was a silent contest of glances in the rear view mirror until Reed pulled up in front of Margaret's North Austin home, his smile not quite touching his eyes. Once inside, Doris's whisper sliced the air. How could he know those things? Margaret grasped for rationality, sharp eyes, photographic memory, but even to her, the excuses felt hollow. Turning the bag over, she remembered the sticker she and Lucia had tucked inside instead of writing her name, a compromise to preserve her daughter's sense of style. The bag had been popular. Yes, other girls had similar ones, and knockoffs had existed, but this one's worn seams and the scrubbed white tag told a different story. Doris proposed an antique shop on Burnett Road, their best chance at confirming the bag's origin. Margaret agreed, a quiet steel settling into her voice. Moments later, they were back in the car, the blue handbag cradled in Doris's lap as the late afternoon sun bathed the streets in gold. They drove toward answers, or toward a truth they might not be ready to face. Margaret drove with a tight grip on the wheel, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. Burnett Antiques should still be open, she said, glancing at her watch. Mr. Keller has always known his way around vintage collectibles. Neither she nor Doris spoke much during the drive. Traffic was steady, but the silence between them was heavier than anything outside. First, Jim's crushed Cadillac, now this handbag, that so perfectly matched Lucia's cherished one. It was too much for coincidence. "Do you really think it could be hers?" Doris asked quietly, running her fingers along the white trim as if it might whisper an answer. "I don't know what to think anymore, Mom," Margaret murmured. "If it was hers, and Reed was lying, why would he keep it for decades?" 20 minutes later, they pulled into the small lot of Burnett Antiques, a modest storefront, squeezed between a bakery and a hardware store. Inside, a soft jingle from the door announced their arrival, mingling with the scent of old books and furniture polish. The shop was a carefully curated maze-glass display cases, filled with jewelry and keepsakes, polished wood furniture lining the aisles like watchful sentinels. Mr. Keller, a genial man in his 60s, looked up from behind the counter with warm recognition. "Mrs. Halbrook, Mrs. Barrett, what a surprise. What brings you in?" "We were hoping you could tell us about this handbag," Margaret said, motioning for Doris to place it on the counter. Mr. Keller adjusted his glasses, studied it briefly, and gave a knowing hum. "Interesting piece, children's accessory. Early 1980s, if I'm not mistaken. Not my specialty, though. Let me call Robert." Moments later, a younger man with salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses emerged from the back. "This is Robert K.," Keller introduced, "specialist in vintage toys and collectibles. His wife's a serious Barbie collector. If anyone can identify this, it's him." Robert examined the bag with the ease of someone who'd handled hundreds before. He checked the vinyl texture, the stitching, the clasps, hardware, and then opened it, running his fingertips along the seams. "What exactly are you hoping to find out?" he asked. "We want to confirm if it's an original Mattel from the limited edition Barbie line in the early 1980s, Margaret replied, "and, if possible, the exact year." Robert nodded, retrieved a jeweler's loupe, and inspected the stitching more closely. "Quality matches Mattel's production from that period," he said. "This blue was part of their Barbie World collection, and yes, the zipper pulls design fits that era perfectly." Pulling out his phone, he excused himself to consult his wife. Doris leaned in and whispered, "He thinks it's authentic." Margaret gave a cautious glance. "That doesn't prove it's Lucia's, just that it's the right vintage." Robert returned with an almost definitive answer. "My wife confirms it's from the 1983 to 84 limited run. This shade of blue, only made for about 8 months. Then his brow furrowed. "But there's something else. The identification tag, it's been tampered with." Margaret leaned forward. Robert pointed with his pen to faint puckering in the fabric and odd discolorations. "Looks like someone deliberately removed the printing, probably with heat maybe. A household iron. In the right light, you can still see where the ink once was." Robert's words about the deliberate heat damage still echoed in Margaret's mind as they stepped out into the evening air. The tampering hadn't been careless. It had been targeted, surgical. Someone had wanted the bag's identity erased. Inside the car, Doris's voice was low and urgent. "Margaret, someone deliberately removed the identification from this bag." "I know." Margaret's fingers traced the faint puckering round the tag. "We need to take this to the police," Doris pressed. "They need to know about Reed's connection to both Jim's car and this bag." Margaret nodded, the decision crystallizing. Even if it isn't Lucia's, even if his daughter got it from a school friend, the police should know. The plan steadied her, and she started the engine, turning the wheel toward the station. The bag sat between them on the console, a silent witness. Too many questions. They hadn't gone far when a crimson brake warning light flickered to life. On the dashboard, Margaret frowned and tapped the brake pedal. It felt spongy, sinking too icily under her foot. "What's wrong?" Doris asked, glancing up from the handbag. "The brake light just came on," Margaret said, trying again. This time, the pedal nearly hit the floor. "Something's definitely not right." Moments later, the engine began to lose power, and the car gave a subtle shudder. Margaret signaled and coasted toward the curb, easing the car into park before it could stall completely. She turned the key. Nothing but a sputter. "This has never happened before," she muttered, stepping out to lift the hood. No steam, no obvious leaks, just the inert smell of warm metal. "Should we call a tow truck?" Doris joined her at the front. "I suppose we'll have to," Margaret said, reaching for her phone. She had just unlocked the screen when a pickup truck slowed behind them and pulled in. The sight of the driver made her pulse hitch. Reed Carraway stepped out, his expression painted with concern, a tall, broad-shouldered man climbing out on the passenger side. "Margaret, Doris," Reed called as he walked toward them. "Everything okay? I was just driving by and saw you pulled over." Margaret forced a thin smile, though a prickle of unease crept up her spine. "What a coincidence. We're having some car trouble." The stalled sedan. Reed's arrival had already set her on edge, but when he introduced his companion, "This is my buddy Jason. He's pretty good with cars," her stomach tightened another notch. Jason crouched under the hood, listening as Margaret repeated the symptoms. After a few minutes of quiet prodding at the engine, he straightened, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Brake lines leaking fluid," he said. "Might have messed with your transmission too. Not safe to drive like this. Can you fix it?" "Here?" Margaret asked. He shook his head. "Nah, needs proper tools. Parts too." Reed stepped in smoothly. "Where were you headed? Maybe we can give you a lift." "The police station," Doris said, clutching her purse tighter. Reed's eyebrows arched. "Everything okay?" "Yes, just following up about Jim's car," Margaret said, deliberately vague. "Well, I can call a tow. Get it taken to the junkyard. We've got all the tools there. Cheaper than a garage," Reed offered. "That's very kind, but," Margaret began. "I'd like to go to the police station first," Doris cut in sharply. Margaret felt the tension rising. "Mom, maybe it makes more sense to fix the car first. We can always call Detective Reyes from the junkyard." Reed nodded quickly. "Exactly. No sense letting it sit here all night." Without waiting for agreement, he pulled out his phone. "Tow will be here in 10 minutes, he announced after a short call. The minutes stretched in brittle silence. Doris's disapproval was a physical presence beside Margaret, but she kept her voice down. Yes, the coincidences were unsettling, but Reed had been nothing but helpful before. A tow truck rolled up on time, its logo unfamiliar. The driver, a burly, tattooed man, wordlessly hooked up the car. "All set," Reed said as the truck pulled away. "You ladies can ride with us to the junkyard." Margaret opened the passenger door. Doris lingered by the rear bumper, eyes narrowed at the license plate. "You coming?" Reed called. Doris finally moved, sliding into the back seat and leaning forward to whisper in her daughter's ear, "I don't like this. We should have called the police." Margaret tried to reassure her, but the unease was spreading now. The timing of Reed's appearance, his insistence on the junkyard. "Actually, Reed, I've changed my mind," Margaret said as he started the engine. "Drop us at the police station instead." "Sure," Reed replied icily. But as the minutes passed, Margaret's unease sharpened. The streets outside looked wrong, industrial buildings, not the downtown station. "This doesn't seem like the way," she said. "Shortcut," Reed replied without looking at her. "Less traffic." From the passenger seat, Jason turned to face them. The friendly expression he'd worn earlier was gone, replaced by something cold and flat. "Reed," Doris said sharply from the back, "where are you taking us? This is not the way." Reed's hands tightened on the wheel. "Change of plans." Margaret felt her pulse spike. "What do you mean?" Jason reached under his seat and came up with a compact handgun, a suppressor already screwed into place. The sound inside the cab seemed to vanish, replaced by the deafening thud of her heartbeat. Margaret's voice trembled as she pleaded, "Please, we haven't done anything wrong." Doris quickly added, her tone sharper and more urgent, "My daughter is a police detective. You are making a huge mistake." The older man's eyes flicked toward them, his weathered face showing no visible reaction. Yet there was a flicker in his gaze, a momentary hesitation that Margaret caught. He shifted in his chair, the old floorboard creaking under his boot, but said nothing. The room was thick with stale cigarette smoke, and the faint hum of the radiator chained to their cuffs filled the silence like a countdown clock. Somewhere outside, a burst of muffled laughter came from the direction of the camper, followed by a slam of metal. Whoever the boss was, he was still occupied, but time was running short. Margaret leaned closer to her mother, her voice barely above a whisper. "The text you sent, you think they'll know where we are?" Doris gave a small nod, her eyes darting toward the door. "If they trace it in time." The older man's jaw tightened, and for a brief instant, Margaret thought she saw the ghost of sympathy in his expression. But just as quickly it was gone, replaced by a guarded, almost weary detachment. He glanced toward the hallway as if listening for footsteps, then back at them. "You shouldn't talk," he murmured quietly, almost to himself. It was the first break in his silence, and it carried an unsettling weight as though he knew exactly what was coming next. Margaret's heart pounded so hard she could barely hear her own voice, but she forced herself to speak. "She find us. If you help us now, they'll go easier on you." Micah didn't respond, lifting the newspaper again as though hiding behind it, though his eyes weren't moving across the print. "Please," Margaret pressed, her voice cracking under the weight of desperation. "We're just trying to find my daughter and husband. They vanished 16 years ago." For long, painful minutes, the women pleaded, explaining, reasoning, begging, while Micah sat motionless, occasionally casting wary glances toward the hallway as if every sound might bring trouble crashing through the door. Then, the creak of hinges broke the tension. Micah straightened quickly, alarm flashing in his eyes, but it was only him returning, his face set in stone. He leaned down sharply. "Be quiet," he hissed, "or they'll hurt you. You don't know what they're capable of." Doris softened her voice, her words careful and deliberate. "I'm Doris Barrett, and this is my daughter, Margaret Halbrook. We're looking for my granddaughter, Lucia Halbrook. She was only 8 when she disappeared with her father. If she's here, please, just tell us." Micah froze, listening for footsteps, then glanced at the hallway before finally speaking in a low, cautious whisper. "They call her Samantha here, but I knew her name was Lucia before. They changed it 4 years ago." Margaret's breath caught in her throat, her knees weakening. "She's here. My Lucia is here." Micah's eyes hardened again. "Keep your voice down. I can be a dead man for being a good man now." Doris's voice carried a quiet strength. "Our years are short anyway, sir. Soon we'll all be judged by what we've done. Please help us." Micah's face tightened with an inner battle that played out in every line of his features. Then, the sound of footsteps came closer. Doris whispered one last "please," and something in Micah broke. He exhaled heavily, as if surrendering to a truth he'd been avoiding. "I do this for Samantha," he muttered, pulling a battered cell phone from his pocket. His hands trembled as he quickly dialed 911, gave the farmhouse's location, and slipped the phone away just as the door swung open. 3 men entered: Reed, Jason, and a hulking, muscular figure in a filthy white tank top and boxers, his hairy legs bristling and faded tattoos snaking up his arms. Margaret's stomach knotted. This had to be the boss. "What are you doing in here, Micah?" the man rasped, his voice like gravel. "You're not supposed to be with the prisoners." Micah took a half step back, masking his fear. "They were noisy, brother. I was just telling them to be quiet." The boss's eyes narrowed, his suspicion cutting through the room. "Search him," he ordered Reed and Jason. "If you find anything, deal with him." Reed nodded without hesitation. "Yes, boss." Without another word, Reed and Micah left, leaving Margaret and Doris trapped with Jason and the looming figure. The boss approached slowly, his gaze crawling over them in a way that made Margaret's skin prickle. "So," he said, his voice thick with something foul, "Red tells me you're here for Samantha." He reached out, brushing Margaret's hair, then leaned in to breathe in its scent. "I like older women too, not just the young ones." Margaret jerked back, the cuffs clanging against the radiator. "Give her back to us," she demanded, her voice steadier than she expected. The boss chuckled, a deep, chilling sound. "That can't happen," he said, "but I'll tell you what I can do." "They'll go easier on you." The older man didn't answer. He lifted his newspaper, eyes skimming the page but not truly reading. "Please," Margaret pressed, her voice cracking. "We're only trying to find my daughter and husband. They vanished 16 years ago." For several minutes, she and Doris pleaded, explaining, bargaining, begging for any scrap of humanity. Then the man remained unmoved, his only reaction an occasional glance toward the door, as if fearful of being overheard. Finally, after what felt like hours compressed into minutes, the door creaked open. The man stood quickly, alarm in his posture, but his tension eased slightly. It wasn't the others, only one figure stepping inside. His expression hardened into a mask of authority as he hissed, "Be quiet, or they'll hurt you. You have no idea what they're capable of." Doris's tone softened into a quiet appeal. "I'm Doris Barrett. This is my daughter, Margaret Halbrook. We're looking for my granddaughter, Lucia Halbrook. She was 8 when she disappeared with her father. If she's here, please, just tell us." His eyes, hard and unreadable, studied them before flicking toward the hallway to ensure they were alone. When he turned back, something shifted in his gaze, an almost imperceptible thaw. "They call her Samantha here," he whispered, "but I knew her as Lucia before they changed her name. About 4 years ago." Margaret's breath caught, and her knees weakened. "She's here, my Lucia." He gave a curt nod. "Keep your voice down." Margaret's tears streamed freely now. "Please help us. You're not like them. I can tell you're a good man." His jaw tightened. "A good man is a dead man here. You don't know who you're dealing with." Doris, her voice urgent yet calm, said, "Our time on this earth is short, sir. Soon we'll be gone, and only our deeds will remain. Please, help us." He seemed to wrestle with himself, his weathered face caught between fear and conscience. Footsteps echoed in the hall. Doris whispered one last please. He exhaled heavily, as if sealing his own fate. "I do this for Samantha," he muttered, pulling a cell phone from his pocket. His fingers trembled as he dialed 911, whispered the farmhouse's location, and hung up just as the door opened again. 3 men entered, Reed, Jason, and a hulking, muscular man with hairy bare legs, a stained white tank top, and faded tattoos crawling up his arms. Margaret's stomach turned instantly. This was the boss Reed had mentioned. "What are you doing in here, Micah?" The boss rasped. "You're not supposed to be with the prisoners." Micah took a step back, fear flashing across his face. "They were noisy, brother. I was just telling them to be quiet." The boss studied him, suspicion narrowing his eyes. "Search him. If you find anything, deal with him." Reed's nod was quick, cold, and obedient. Micah and Reed left, leaving Margaret and Doris alone with Jason and the boss. The large man approached with a slow, deliberate menace, his gaze sweeping over them in a way that made Margaret's skin crawl. "So," he said, his voice thick and predatory, "Red tells me you're here for Samantha." He reached out to touch Margaret's hair, inhaling deeply. "I like older women too." Margaret jerked away, her cuffs clanging against the radiator. "Give her back to us," she demanded, summoning courage from a place she didn't know existed. The boss's deep laugh was like gravel under boots. "That's not happening. But I'll give you a game." He motioned to Jason, who returned moments later with 3 young women, wished with long brown hair and the same slender build. They kept their heads bowed, eyes fixed on the floor. Pick, which one is Samantha? No talking. You both point at the same time. Get it right. You see her, just see her. Margaret and Doris's hearts pounded as they scanned the women, and then Margaret saw a faint scar above the right eyebrow. The same one Lucia had gotten when she tumbled off her bicycle at 6. 1, 2, 3 point. The boss barked. Both women pointed at the scarred girl. His grin widened. Well, I'll be damned. Family really can smell their own. The other 2 women were ushered away, leaving only the boss, Jason, Margaret, Doris, and the girl they'd identified, Lucia. Margaret whispered, her voice trembling. The young woman's blank eyes didn't lift. Her expression was an empty shell. Now for the real fun, the boss said darkly. Samantha strip. Margaret and Doris gasped in horror. Please, don't do this, Margaret cried. Leave her alone, Doris added, her voice shaking. The boss ignored them. I said strip. Samantha began moving mechanically, her face still vacant. Then the boss paused, grinning cruelly. More flavors would be nice. He unlocked Margaret from the radiator but left the cuffs on, dragging her to the center of the room. Samantha, strip her for me. Margaret's voice cracked in desperation. Lucia, I'm your mother. Samantha hesitated for the briefest moment, something flickering in her eyes before fading back into emptiness. The boss's laugh was low and cruel. With sudden violence, he ripped Margaret's blouse at the shoulder, his hands beginning to roam until the door burst open. Reed stood there, pale, boss police outside. The boss's expression flipped from lust to fury. How the hell? They've surrounded the place, Reed said. The boss cursed, yanking a gun from Reed's waistband. Then I'll do it myself. He aimed at Margaret, but before he could fire, Micah lunged into the room, throwing himself in front of her. 2 shots cracked through the air. Micah crumpled, blood blooming across his shirt. The boss pulled the trigger again. Click. Empty. Damn it. He hurled the gun aside. Give me another. Before anyone could react, the farmhouse erupted with the sound of splintering wood and a chorus of commanding shouts. Police stormed inside, weapons raised, ordering everyone to drop their guns. In an instant, the room was flooded with heavily armed officers, their eyes locked on Reed, Jason, and the man they called the boss. Jason surrendered immediately, hands high in the air, and Reed followed suit. But the boss, defiant too, the end, lunged toward an officer. A single gunshot rang out, striking his thigh, yet he only laughed a dark, unhinged sound taunting that he'd survived more bullets than he could count. Another officer fired, hitting his shoulder, and this time the man dropped to his knees, still glaring with defiance. Chaos swirled as officers secured the 3 men, and paramedics rushed to Micah's side. Freed at last from her handcuffs, Margaret darted to Samantha. Lucia, her daughter, standing stiff and unresponsive amid the flashing lights and shouts. It's me, honey. It's Mum, she whispered, her fingers trembling as they brushed against Lucia's cheek. But there was nothing, no flicker of recognition, only an empty stare that told of horrors far deeper than any wound. Doris, now free as well, stumbled to them, tears streaming as she clasped Margaret's arm. We found her, she sobbed. After all these years, we finally found her. Outside, the scene pulsed with red and blue light as police swarmed the property, collecting evidence, photographing every inch, while paramedics worked swiftly on the injured. The boss, still smirking through his pain, was shoved into a waiting cruiser. Reed kept his head low, avoiding every gaze. Jason stared ahead blankly, as though the last hour had drained him of all thought. A paramedic guided Margaret toward an ambulance, speaking gently as she examined the torn skin on her shoulder. It's a small cut, no stitches needed, but we'll bandage it, she said, though Margaret's attention never strayed from her daughter. Wrapped in a heavy blanket, Lucia sat on a stretcher, unmoving, her gaze fixed somewhere far away. She's physically fine, the medic added cautiously, but she's not responding. A trauma specialist will need to see her immediately. Doris joined them, exhaustion etched into her face, yet her voice steady. She's been through more than we can imagine, but we'll bring her back, she promised. A sudden commotion drew their attention. Paramedics were rushing Micah, his shirt drenched in blood, toward another ambulance. We have to move now, one medic barked. He's losing too much blood. As they loaded him inside, a young officer stepped over to Margaret and Doris. Your daughter needs to be transported to the hospital right away. he said firmly. And you both need a full evaluation too. Let's get you there together. Shut. That man. He saved my life. Will he be okay? The officer's expression remained steady. They're doing everything they can. Mika's conscious and strong, according to the medics. As they approached the ambulance, where Lucia sat still and unresponsive, another paramedic hurried over. Before we go, he said quietly, Micah told us something important. His name is Micah Carraway, and Reed Carraway is his son. Margaret stopped dead. His son. The paramedic nodded. He said Reed works for Charlie Carnes, big guy in the tank top. Apparently, Carnes is Micah's stepbrother. Doris's head snapped up, eyes wide. That poor man. His own son abandoned him for a monster. The paramedic guided them. Inside the ambulance, the detectives will speak with you at the hospital. Strapped in next to Lucia, eyes vacant, fixed on nothing, Margaret reached over, shaking. We're here now. Lucy, you're safe. No response came, not even a flicker. Doris squeezed her shoulder in solidarity as sirens faded into the city lights dot at the hospital. Lucia was whisked into a treatment room, while Margaret and Doris were led to be examined themselves. Cleared and worn out, they waited silently in a private consultation area. Margaret's voice was fragile. I can't believe we found her. After all these years. Doris nodded, tears brimming. It's a miracle, but she endured horrors. Detective Reyes entered, offering a gentle greeting. Have you spoken with my daughter? Margaret asked. Reyes shook his head. Doctors are still evaluating her. She's physically okay, but they're concerned about her mental state. Doris asked about Micah. He's in surgery, Reyes replied. Doctors are optimistic. The bullets missed vital organs. Margaret's voice hardened. And the men who took Reed and Charlie Carnes. Reyes confirmed all three are in custody. We've secured the blue handbag as evidence. We're also investigating the junkyard owner's ties to Reed. Doris leaned forward. Did Reed or Jason say anything about Jim and Lucio? What happened 16 years ago? Reyes hesitated. We're piecing it together. But we recognized Carnes immediately. He's a serial killer who's evaded capture for decades. He changes identities, preys on women and girls, under intimidation and abuse. Margaret felt sick. Her daughter in the hands of that monster all those years. How did he meet Jim and Lucia? She whispered, needing to understand. Reyes looked down at his notes. Reed's cooperating now. He said he almost felt invisible. He was 10 years old when it started. Carnes posed as a strong figure, unlike Micah, whom Red saw as weak. Reyes sighed and continued. They were near Marble Falls when they spotted Jim's red Cadillac. Posing as hitchhikers, they claimed Reed was sick. Jim let them ride and even gave them an adjoining room at the motel. The weight of that friendly gesture turned tragic, pulsed in the silence. Tears clung to Margaret's lashes as Detective Morales described how Jim, ever the helper, always trusting, had unwittingly offered aid to what seemed a stranded hit near Llano, a gesture that would shatter everything. After that evening's dinner, Charlie had slipped a sedative into Jim's drink, then strangled him in the motel bathroom while Lucia slept. A strangled cry escaped Doris's lips as Margaret squeezed her hand. Charlie staged a disappearance, telling Lucia that her father had been hospitalized, whisking her away in a hidden car, silently gaslighting her into believing her mother was gone too. Over time, he erased Lucia's identity into her Samantha, isolating her with forged documents and constant relocation. Margaret could barely whisper about her husband's fate, but Detective Morales continued. Reed and his friend staged the cleanup. Charlie dumped Jim's body into a limestone sinkhole and hid the Cadillac deep in the woods until just last week. Doris asked how the car ended up in the junkyard. Reed, under Charlie's sway, had brought it there to crush it, believing 16 years would bury any suspicion. Margaret reeled, her heart breaking anew. Her husband murdered that first night. Her daughter stolen and abused for 16 horrendous years. The detective softened his tone, promising they would search the sinkhole for Jim's remains. Before Margaret could respond, a doctor entered to say Lucia had been moved to a private room. She was stable, though still silent. In a quiet corridor, Margaret's heart both broke and soared as she finally saw her daughter, a grown woman, fragile, staring blankly at the ceiling. Lucia, she murmured, reaching out. Doris perched close by. For long moments there was nothing until, just as Margaret feared, hope was gone. Lucia's dry whisper broke the silence. "I'm so sorry for being so broken." Margaret's tears flowed freely. "It's not your fault, sweetheart," she sobbed. "We're together now." Lucia's tear and use of the word daddy, all at 24, felt achingly like the 8-year-old she had been. "No, baby," Margaret said, smoothing her hair. A nurse knocked gently. Micah Carraway, wanting to see her. Despite reluctance, Margaret followed, leaving Doris to stay with Lucia. In the next room, Micah lay bandaged and pale but alert. Softly, he apologized for himself and for Reed. Margaret closed the distance, gratitude flooding her voice. "You saved my life," she said. "Without you, we'd still be in that farmhouse. We might never have found her." Micah closed his eyes, voice weak but earnest. My son, he always hated gentlemen. He saw them as weak. That's why they preyed on your husband." Margaret knelt, squeezing his hand. "You risked everything. There's nothing to forgive." Returned to Lucia's side, Margaret found her granddaughter asleep, peaceful for the first time. Doris sat vigil, tears gleaming with relief. Margaret took the bedside chair, holding Lucia's hand in hers. After 16 years of searching and hopeless nights, her daughter was home. The road ahead would be long, but they would walk it together, one breath at a time. And Margaret, silently, thanked the cruel twist of fate that led them to the junkyard's crushed red Cadillac and the blue bag that finally led them back to each other.